demographic situation is worse than any country in history. The banking situation is worse than any country in history. The dependence on imported energy and the inputs that allow them to import their own food suggest that a deindustrialization and an agricultural collapse is in the offing should anything go wrong. Their military is limited to a largely coastal fleet. Doesn't mean it can't hurt Taiwan badly. In fact, if a war were to be pulled off today and the Chinese did get their sneak attack in, they'd probably win because U.S. forces are just too far away and can't get there soon enough. But that doesn't solve any other problems. Demographics can't be solved with military force, and anything that they do to piss off the United States could very well lead to a trade cutoff of everything that matters to them. Now, the Chinese don't believe that that will happen. They don't think anyone is that serious about defending Taiwan, and I would argue that's probably a miscalculation, but that's what happens when you have a cult of personality government. And that cult of personality government kind of leads us to this fentanyl thing. The problem with a cult of personality is no one is willing to tell the leader the truth. But it also means that you will get mid to low level and mid to low intelligence bureaucrats who think they're doing the leader's bidding and will do things that maybe aren't in the country's best interests. Now, the spy balloon is an excellent example of that because, let's be honest, this was a giant thing about the size of an Embraer jet. If you've ever flown out of a small airport, you know what those are. They're like the Barbie dream jets with 2 seats on one side and 1 seat on the other. Completely horrible aircraft. A pain to be on, tiny, unless it's dangling from a 400-foot diameter balloon, in which case, it's pretty substantial. Now, the Biden administration's first gut was to shoot the thing down, but the intelligence and defense officials in the U.S. talked them out of it. She's like, Mr. President, it's not going to see anything. It's like it's going over our missile launching facilities, which are going to be closed unless you're planning on launching a general nuclear strike next week. So let's just do whisper sensors on the thing, put a helicopter below it, a spy plane above it, and for 9 days just track the bastard all the way across the country and get all of the cryptography, get the hardware on the back end, find out where the orders are coming from and going to. It'll be the intelligence find of a decade. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen a country do. And if you think of the last 20, 30 years, a lot of countries have done a lot of really dumb things. Fentanyl, it fell into the category of the defense ministry didn't know. Xi didn't know, but some dumbass in their intelligence services thought that this is what he was supposed to do to, beat the chest. If fentanyl is a state effort, it's probably something like that, where the real power brokers, especially Xi at the top, are wholly unaware. Now, one of the things that we have seen across the Chinese space, even in their own internal system, is the concept of making money supersedes the concept of physical safety, consumer safety, or fraud. And so they'll get like melamine in their baby formula, even though it's highly toxic and will kill people by the dozen. Fentanyl probably falls into that category a little bit too, that you just have someone who's relatively unscrupulous shoving it into the Mexican system. Because, let's be honest, anyone who's deliberately selling things to a cartel is probably not all that above the board with their normal operations. To my knowledge, we do not have evidence that the Chinese government is doing this directly, but that doesn't mean that they can't stop it. Everything was that Trump would send a tweet and then that would be the end of it. He'd never have a conversation with the appropriate branches of government about making sure that things happen. In many ways, he was simply a less engaged version of Barack Obama. Well, let me kick 3 things in here real quick. Number one, leftist academics being anti-American, that's really not all that new, and they don't need a whole lot of pushing from foreign propaganda in order for that to happen. They've always, even if they're consider themselves patriotic, been among the more critical ones, and of course some of the more critical ones are not particularly patriotic. So I don't think there's too much on that specific angle. As for the rest of society, you're absolutely right. The Russians are far more successful at using propaganda to drive wedges, or more accurately, exploit wedges within American society than any other foreign power has ever been in any American era. At the moment, they have gotten the most traction and the most desperate attention with the MAGA crowd, because that is the only real faction of American society at the moment that is saying things that are anti-Ukrainian. And the Russians have started a war that is of significant size, and they're discovering that it's a lot more difficult than they thought it was going to be. So everything from supporting Donald Trump or encouraging people who are on the left to do something particularly dumb. They love some Tucker Carlson. And it's gotten to the point that we're now seeing a pushback in American society against that broad spectrum effort by the Russians. I'm not saying it's going to end. I'm not even saying the pushback is going to be successful. But I mean, look at the case of Tucker. He caused so many headaches for the folks at Fox that he got let go. I mean, he's literally going to cost them $2 billion over the next few weeks. I mean, that's a really good reason to get rid of a lion sack of shit that's basically repeating Russian propaganda. Sorry, I kind of got away from myself there. There's another angle that you were after. Now, the problem is when you're a victim of propaganda, you believe you have a vested personal interest in continuing to do what you're doing, because to say otherwise would expose you as somebody who is wrong. And that's embarrassing. And especially if it's wrapped up with your own political agenda, what are you going to say? Everything about me is wrong, and that's why we have foreign people manipulating me? I mean, that takes a swallowing a lot of ego. And let's, just call it what it is. Donald Trump has a bit of an ego. We have the same thing with people on the left. Bernie Sanders fell in the same category. Jill Stein of the Green Party, absolutely the same. But with those two people, with those two people, the Russians never got the success that they've had. If Bernie Sanders says something about foreign policy, everybody's eyes glaze over. It doesn't generate a new movement. With Donald Trump, it did. MAGA is let me rephrase that, conservative populists. They existed long before Donald Trump came along, but they were kind of on the fringes of the political system. They've now had a taste of power. They're not going to go away. They are part of the web work, and they are ultimately going to be an indelible part of the American political landscape moving forward. Hopefully they'll get a little bit smarter about who they believe, but with all political factions that come in from the cold, there's always going to be an adjustment period. They're going through theirs now. As to whether or not they can ever gain power again, I don't think in the near term. From my point of view, the independents have been so horrified by what the Trump movement has done, first on January 6th, then in the midterm elections, and most recently with the town hall that we just saw, which was, basically Trumpism, all caps, that they will never vote for a MAGA candidate ever again. There was a lot of exit polling done after the midterms, and the vast majority of independents, not people who say they're independent but really side with the party 3/4 of the time, but actual independents, said that while they disagree with Biden's economic policies and thought those policies personally harmed them, they still massively voted in favor of Democrats because they saw what the Trump movement was doing was so antithetical to their own personal power. Because from an independent point of view, you can't participate typically in the primaries. And so if Trump is putting up candidates that are nuts, you don't have much of a choice, because if Trump gets his way, then the general election no longer matters. And that's the only place where independents have a card to play. So he has basically taken 10% of the population that decides the elections in half of the states, and has made sure that they will never vote for him again. So at least for this next general election in 2 years, assuming that Biden doesn't die, which, reasonable, we're probably going to be looking at a washout of the Republicans. We're probably going to be seeing something that's going to look a little bit like that 1984 washout where Mondale just completely lost traction on everything. DeSantis is broadly respected on both sides of the aisle in Florida. I don't mean to suggest he would be a bad candidate, but I don't think he's going to run this time, because if he does, Donald Trump will dedicate every fiber of his being to destroying his political career. And why would you do that to then only have to run after an incumbent president? So what I'm guessing is going to go down is that he'll stay out of this one and allow Donald Trump to prove to all the donors that he was, again, a horrible, horrible candidate. And then 4 years from now, he'll step in and pick up all the sponsorships. and he will then be running against a non-incumbent Democrat, and it would be a much easier race. He's legs. And then, of course, there's that Disney thing that he really needs to get resolved one way or the other, because that is not resonating with anyone.